I've saved my progress as betterbyline.ai found inside the O8 type folder. You may recall I ended the previous exercise saying that we were going to adjust the amount of horizontal spacing between the characters of type in our headline. And the reason is I want to make my headline a little bit narrower. Because if you take a careful look at the P's over here on the left-hand side, you'll see that their serifs, these tiny little lines that are coming off the P's, don't actually touch the left margin line. They appear a point or two inside the margin. Meanwhile, the N and the comma extend beyond the edge of the right margin. Well, you might say, gosh, I guess the thing to do is to change the size value, so make the type a little smaller. However, I've got another problem with my type. The characters are not spaced properly. Notice the P is pretty far away from the O, where the E and the M are fairly close to each other. The W and the R have a big space between them. The R and the I are almost touching, and so on. And I want a more consistent look and feel, especially where my headline is concerned. Now, in an ideal world, this is taken care of automatically by Illustrator because every professional quality font out there, and in this case, we're dealing with Adobe crafted fonts. So they are professionally designed font files. Every font contains this thing called the kerning pair table. And the kerning pair table overrides the amount of default spacing between two characters of type. For example, if I enter A, B, like so, notice that the A and the B almost touch each other, but they have a slight bit of space between their serifs. And this is a function of what's known as side bearing. Side bearing is the default amount of space on either side of any character of type to keep the characters from overlapping each other. But that default spacing doesn't work for every pair of characters. For example, I'll click between the A and the B, and I'll bring up the character panel, and you can see right there's the kerning value, and it's set to 0. So in other words, there's no special spacing being applied between these two characters. But if I change that B to a V, and then I click between the A and the V, notice that Illustrator automatically switches that kerning value to -60. And the reason is because Illustrator's looking for that pair of characters in the kerning pair table that's included along with the font. And it finds it because AV's the classic combo. You'll notice that A and V appear in the icon for the kerning option. And the reason for that is they extend into each other's negative space. The A tucks under the V, so they'd look weird if this value was set to 0. This is the way they would look normally if there was no kerning applied, and that's fairly ridiculous. So Illustrator compares that pair of characters to the kerning pair table, finds it, and applies the auto spacing value, and ends up with -60 right there. However, this doesn't always work, is the problem. Not all pairs of characters are found inside of that table. In fact, very few pairs are. I mean, there's just a ton of possible letter pairs. And your typical kerning pair table might contain, let's say, 200 or 300 pairs of characters. And it's very unlikely it's going to contain capital characters. For example, a big capital W next to a little capital R, which is the way it works with Trajan. Trajan doesn't have any lowercase characters. So because WR is not listed in the table, the kerning value is 0. Well, that's no good. So let's say you want to change that value. Now, you don't want to enter some other kerning value because you don't know what to enter at this point, and it's measured in M spaces, which is a little difficult to predict. So instead, you press this keyboard shortcut. Alt left arrow moves the characters together. This would be Option left arrow on the Mac. Alt right arrow or Option right arrow moves the characters apart from each other. If you want to move the characters toward each other or apart from each other more quickly, because I went ahead and set this value to 5/1000ths of an M space. You may recall a few exercises back inside the Preferences dialog box. To change this value in 5x increments, you press Control-Alt left arrow or Command-Option left arrow on the Mac. That would be Control-Alt right arrow or Command-Option right arrow on the Mac. However, in my case, I think I want to switch away from what's known as metric kerning. I'm going to go ahead and select both lines of my headline, and I'm going to do that incidentally using that triple click technique. So it's click, 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 and hold, drag down in order to grab both lines of type. And notice your default setting for kerning is auto, and that goes ahead and references the information in the kerning pair table. And Adobe swears by that. They're like, with their fonts, you always want to go with auto. That's not my experience, however. You also have this optical option where you put Illustrator in charge of the kerning, and that actually works out really well for headlines, especially when you have strange pairs of all caps characters as you do with Trajan Pro. And that's going to go ahead and make that text look a heck of a lot better, by the way. So notice as soon as I choose optical, the O moves toward the P, the M and the E move slightly apart from each other, the W and the R, they move toward each other a little bit. We have a little more space between the R and the I, so things are looking a lot better here. And that's thanks to Illustrator figuring this out on the fly based on the character shapes. It's amazing technology. And then finally, you have this option that you're never going to use, is my guess. What it does is it applies the metrics, that is auto-kerning, to the Roman text only. So if you're using a combination of Roman text along with, say, kanji characters or some other Asian alphabet, why, then this is the way to go. However, in my case, I'm going to select optical. And then I'm going to scroll my page down here just a little bit, and I'm just going to triple click in that first line of type to select the entire thing. And now I want to adjust what's known as the tracking, which is essentially character spacing assigned to multiple characters of type at a time. And I'm going to press Alt left arrow, or on the Mac, Option left arrow twice in a row in order to reduce that value to -10. And finally, I want to take the comma in a little bit. So I'm going to click between the N and the comma. And this time you'll want to watch the kerning value. That is the bottom left value here inside the character panel. Notice the value is currently set to -40 as a result of the optical kerning. But I'm going to press Control Alt left arrow a couple of times in a row. That's Command Option left arrow on the Mac. That'll take it down to -90, and finally I'll press Alt left arrow twice in a row or Option left arrow twice in a row to reduce that value to -100. So that comma is very close to the end as you see it now, and it allows the comma to hang slightly over the other text. That's what's known as hanging punctuation. Tends to look pretty darn good, especially when combined with very large text, as we have in this headline. And that is how you apply kerning and tracking to your text here inside Illustrator.